fine.
I'll be recording from my end.
Cool.
As well, so.
So, how about I'll just do a quick intro, snippet for now, just go straight into it if you like.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
G'day, it's Rob here from The Rational Rise. I'm just having a quick chat today to I-Theist, who was getting in touch via our blog, wanting to discuss some issues with voluntarist philosophy that we put forward. So, how are you going today, mate?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Great. So
you
what issues I'd talk about?
You sound like you're talking upside down there. Are you calling from down under?
Yeah. Does my my pseudo English accent give it away?
Yeah. Exactly.
You get big arms when you have to walk on your hands.
Yeah. All right. So okay. So it's not exactly like the non-aggression principle that I have a problem with, because like you can take any principle like and apply it universally. I would contend that it's not objective. So as long as you agree with that, we're in agreement. But I wouldn't say, because it's a prescription, right? You ought not initiate force, and then so all prescriptions, all imperatives are based on if clauses. Or based on value premises is another way of putting it. So if I want X, I ought do Y, right? So in other words, I guess what I'm saying here is I don't believe in moral imperatives, only categorical, conditional, rational oughts. So I don't really have a problem. I mean, you could take anything like don't torture babies for your own personal pleasure and, apply that across the board. That works. I guess my contention was with doctrines. I mean, well, this is going to depend on how you define these doctrines. Like, for example, I'm trying to remember what my contentions were with your video. I have a vague remembrance, but it was something about natural rights or something like that, or self-ownership, maybe?
Yes, I think you were talking about self-ownership.
Okay, so what does it mean? When you use those terms, how are you employing them? What does to own something mean? Is that a prescription? Or, because it sounded like you were trying to talk about facts, right? Not prescriptions.
Well, I guess for me, the thinking I have is that if you're going to determine the category property, it's something like, so if you're going to say you own something, you get exclusive use or exclusive say over how it's used. Do you know what I mean? So that you can't hurt another person's body because it's theirs and you don't have a right to do that.
Okay, but what does it mean that it's theirs? Do you mean that they are themselves?
Okay, so my understanding of property is something that comes into existence because a person brought it into existence. And so in the same way that our body is ours because we choose to grow it and maintain it. I mean, every time you drink water or eat food or things like that, or don't walk in front of a bus, you continue to exist as a result of your choice and your actions.
So are you... I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to comment on what you just said. And so you're saying that from the fact that I move my arms, that I choose to feed myself, that I should be able to derive, you ought not initiate force or try to control my body?
No, I'm not, because I'm aware of the you can't derive an ought from an is.
Okay.
But if you are going to have an ought, it can at least be non-contradictory. You know what I mean? So if you want to look at for me, it is a principle, like it's just it's an acceptance of reality that people own themselves. And, if you wanted to, I mean, you could certainly posit a morality that says everyone can initiate every other's initiate force against each other's body as they feel like, but no one's going to accept that, and we don't accept that in a variety of places. So if you want to, look at, any moral against sort of, rape, theft or murder or slavery or whatever, you say, well, each person owns themselves. And obviously that, as you would know, goes back to John Locke saying each person is equal and owns himself and his labour. So to me, because no one else can inhabit your body and move it around, like they can obviously, torture you or convince you to do things, but at the end of the day, no one can co-opt your motor systems and move you around. That no one can inhabit your consciousness and move your body around, so it's yours. And after you take that progression from being, like a dependent child to being an independent human, you make choices every day to live and further your life, and that's kind of the Randian idea. Man exists as a result of his own volition, and so if our body is ours and also our property, and as you said, we are our body, so we own ourselves because we have exclusive ownership over ourselves because we exist as a result of our own volition, then external property would be put in the same category. It's not the same thing, but it belongs in the same category. And obviously I would back that up by saying, well, if you don't believe that, our labour, our external property is our property, then, what right do you have to buy anything with money in your bank? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I would just say that rights don't exist. Rights are just concepts.
I agree.
They're just subjective expectations that humans come up with, right? Like right to bear arms or, right to a speedy trial or something like that. These are just subjective expectations that people have agreed on. I'd say you agree with that, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, how do you get from these facts, right, about, continuing to grow yourself or feed yourself, or let's say you maintain a property, a location in space, how do you derive any kind of prescription from that?
Well, do you first agree
that person is property? Well, hold on, because Ayn Rand commits a bunch of fallacies in her philosophy, so I hope you're not using her stuff. Like, for example, when she misunderstands set theory. So, for example, she'll say that value is a life is a precondition for value. Therefore, life is a value, right? But this is a fatal logical error, because that would be like saying, life is a precondition for shit, therefore life is shit. Or, we can't derive that A is B because A causes B, right?
Okay, I disagree with Rand in that she posits a lot of, things that people should do. I don't think that you could, like she says, say with her virtue of selfishness or whatever, that you should be selfish. I don't think that you could prescribe something that people should do, but I think that you can point out a contradiction between what people are saying you shouldn't do and apply that universally. So I don't completely agree with Rand on her when she starts telling people what they should do in life, whether they should be selfish, that sort of thing. I think it's more up to what people, you're getting into people's aesthetic preferences then, but just the basic sort of idea that she set out that man exists as a result of his own volition. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Of course. Well, I mean, in the sense that we decide to keep going, we don't decide to put a pistol in our mouth and blow our brains out, right? In that sense, I would say that
Okay. And I mean, do you think that is, say, when, the West outlawed slavery, do you think that's the thinking, is that each man owns his own body, it can't be violated?
Well, well, of course it can be violated. I mean, it's just a prescription.
Universally, it's prescription, excuse my word, the word can't. It can, but shouldn't be, because we want to have a universal moral in that regard.
Okay. You mean that, do I agree with the sentiment? Because I'm assuming that, well, okay. So are you a cognitivist or non-cognitivist?
To be honest, I don't know what those words mean.
Oh, okay. So do you? I'll make it simple. So when you say that X is immoral, right? Are you saying that that is an expression of emotion, like a negative or a negative attitude about X, right? Or are you saying, or is there some cognitive belief that there is some substance inside of X that is called immoral, or something like that? I mean, some sort of moral realism, or something.
Right. Okay. So obviously we come from the state of nature. So I'm not trying to derive an ought from an is, because in a state of nature, these things are all moot points. So I accept that. You can't say, in the same way that gravity compels us involuntarily, morality is not going to compel us involuntarily. It needs to be an agreed upon ought by people who can comprehend morality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm on board with your analogy there, but I get what you're saying. I get the spirit of what you're saying.
Yeah, so like morality is can be, like, people can choose to not be moral, but they can't choose to say, if I walk around saying, so I guess, another premise is that people are the same basic unit. And so, like, I think about how, what Rand was talking about, Aristotle's A equals A, but the same thing, if you want to have, like, a logical thought, you can't have opposing prescriptions for something that's in the same scenario under the same circumstances, or the same thing under the same circumstances. So if you're going to say that, like a premise here, that all humans are equal moral actors, then you can't say, like, if I'm going to say, well, everyone's equal morally equal, not the same, but equal morally, and have the same moral standard applied to them, then I couldn't go around saying no one should ever punch anyone in the face and then go punch people in the face. So, like, if I said punching people in the face is evil, then I went and punched people in the face, then by my own logic I would be doing something evil. You know what I mean? So I'd be
Right.
so contradictory there. So what I'm trying to say is that you could say, I don't believe in morality at all, and at which point, because, it doesn't compel people like gravity, but I think that at that point it would be wise for everyone else to, treat that person like a beast, because that's what they're being, you know what I mean? Whereas, so, like, there's three categories, obviously. People say, I don't believe in morality at all, at which point you say that you're free to do that, but you don't really have any sort of rational or logical defense against people acting against you either. And probably people should ostracize you, because there's no way you're openly admitting that you don't believe in moral standards, and you're basically just going to do whatever you can get away with or feel like. That's not a person I would like to associate with. On the other hand, if you are going to say, okay, well, let's construct a morality, it can at least be non-contradictory. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that, in my opinion thus far, morals are optional but not subjective.
Okay. Wait. So morals are optional but not subjective? Is that correct? Now, when you say morals, are you talking about prescriptive morality, descriptive morality, or are you talking about what exactly are you referring to? Like, in other words, would you agree with, when we say morality in this conversation, we're saying how a person ought to behave, correct?
No, I don't think how a person ought to behave. I think that's more of aesthetic preference. Have you ever read Stephen Molyneux's UPV?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm sure you've got issues with that, but
sorry.
The way he categorizes things into like a aesthetic or a non-UPV category. So I wouldn't go around and say, people should eat fish on Fridays or anything like that, because I don't really care. But if you're going to say that somebody can initiate force, and obviously his sort of 4 moral bands there was you can't, rape, theft, murder, or assault. They cannot be universally preferable, not preferred, because preferred means what people will prefer or should, but like they're not able to be applied universally.
Okay, but why ought something be applied universally? Like, why couldn't you have like a, more sectarian morality, right? Something that doesn't.
Because if you're going to base morals off the idea that the same logic needs to apply under the same circumstance, then you know what I mean. Like, what about? So like when I was talking to Dylan about this, we're talking about like the nationalism thing. If you want to be like tribal or say, this ethnic group can have a morality that doesn't apply to another ethnic group. Well, I've always seen that morality is the category of human, because humans have a conceptual reasoning and ability to comprehend, agree upon, and act on morality. So if I'm going to say someone who's a different ethnic group to me, do they have any less ability to agree upon? No.
Sorry, hold on. I'm just having. Yeah, sorry, my monitor was cutting out for some reason.
Sure.
So I missed part of that, but I think what you're getting, it's not your.
If it's going to be sectarian, if you're going to like divide your morals by sectarian lines, well, you're sort of cutting out universality, which is.
No, like you could apply like you could apply different standards to, say, a king, right? You could say, well, I mean, nobody would call a king a hypocrite for not scrubbing his own toilets, right? So I mean, you don't have to apply have a universal morality like Nietzsche, often argued against applying morals universally, but you don't have. What I'm saying is you don't have to have that. If you want to, if it depends on what your value premise is, right? And the value premise is a goal, right? So, if I want to live, then I ought to drink water, right? For example, or if I want to live in a world like Z, then I ought do action C, right? If I don't want to live in a world in which if everyone, let's say that if everyone on this planet doesn't want to live in a world where people are committing fraud against one another, then they ought not initiate force, right? But it's all contingent upon the if I want, right? Which is what makes it subjective. And we couldn't call that moral because the same type of reasoning could be like, if I want to kill as many people as possible, I ought to poison the water supply, right? We can't say that that's a moral argument.
Okay, so when people ended slavery, like, what do you think is the moral argument for doing that?
Well, I'm actually a moral nihilist, right? So I don't really believe in objective morality or moral truths. Like, for example, I think that when someone says that X is immoral, they're just expressing an emotion, and thus it's neither true or false. So it sometimes it's a little more complicated than that. Sometimes people are... See, language is... Moral language, according to C.L. Stevenson and A.J. Ayer and other non-cognitivists, more recent non-cognitivists, is about expressing emotion and provoking emotion in other people. So it's basically about manipulation. It is just the way that humans express themselves. So they say that X is wrong. Well, what is wrongness, right? Can you pour me a couple vials of wrongness? Well, no, it's just we either left with some absurd notion of there being a thing called wrongness in a physical thing, or we're left with saying that wrong just means that I disapprove of X. Not I'm asserting that I disapprove of X, but I'm expressing that by saying that's wrong. It's emotive, right? It's not a truth. Like this glass is on the table. That, in other words, what makes something true is that it has the referent for that thing has in the world properties, like a glass or my hand or something like that, right?
Sure.
So I guess what I'm saying is, and there could be, we could mix some error theory in that and say, and be a cognitivist and say, well, it's a mistaken belief. It's not true. Either there's some unprovable belief about moral Platonic forms or something that someone believes in or something like that. We would say that that's a mistaken, that's a cognitive belief, like believing that there's 2 pints of milk in the refrigerator when there's only one, right? That's a cognitive belief. It's a false belief, but it's still a belief nevertheless. It's still cognitive. Whereas a non-belief, just a non-cognitive emotional state or attitudinal state is just, expressing an emotion about X. It's saying, I don't like X, but it's not asserting that, like in subjectivist theory. That's what subjectivists think. They think that moral terms are saying, I'm bored, or I don't like X, like asserting that, not just expressing that, right? So that would be the difference. So when you ask if I'm a moral nihilist, I would say, if you ask what my position is, I would say that I'm a kind of a hybrid theory between it's like a mixture of moral error theory and non-cognitivism. So I would say that for the most part, moral terms are just expressing emotion. But if you have someone like who's religious and has a belief in, Platonic forms, or that somehow there's this realm of values out there that we just can't test and evaluate, or some non-natural property of wrongness or something, right? That we don't have ordinary epistemic access to, like something we can't empirically test for, right? Then I would say, or someone has a theological belief, right, that pertains to objective or some sort of claim in objective morality, like a divine command theory or something like that, or divine nature theory, or something like that. So I guess what I'm saying is like I see that, like, you can have a universal morality, like, and what I mean by morality is that there's prescriptions. So, you ought not initiate force, right? But my point would be that nobody's bound, no one's obligated to share that unless they share your sentiment, right? About
I agree. So that's what I'm talking about, like the state of nature. Like, you can be a moral nihilist, but I mean, if someone claims morality and then contradicts their own morality based on, you know what I mean? Like, if you say, like, I'm sure we would agree with a priest, and he says, well, this is true because revelation, and then you'd say, well, what about you in reality makes what you say revelation, and therefore elevates it above what I may say is revelation, because I could claim a revelation to be the complete opposite position, and then you could say, yeah, but I'm part of the church because of clothes, because of consensus, because of all these things. But you would say completely logically, well, but if you're a human and I'm a human, we may have slightly different characteristics, but we're more similar than different. And you've got a brain, and what special ability does your brain and your perception have that I don't? Therefore, you're not going to have any special characteristic about you that allows you to see into the n-dimensional realm and receive a revelation that's true, whereas what I might call revelation is going to be false. So if they don't have that, anything that separates them in reality, then they're basically just saying, well, what I perceive to be revelation is divinely true or whatever, and what you perceive it is wrong, because, I mean, if you dismantle those reasons why, like I said, democracy or big church or closed or whatever, you'd go, well, that doesn't make any sense and it's invalid, therefore that whole premise falls apart, do you know what I mean? So,
yeah, I guess my contention with libertarianism is that libertarians just seem so close to. Are you an anarchist, by the way, or are you like a minarchist? Like, do you prefer a no state, like an Ancapistan or something?
I'd have to say, in any real sense, I don't really care. But I'd have to say, philosophically, if you had an anarcho-capitalist society where everybody could agree on living there according to non-aggression, I think that would be ideal.
Okay, so you would agree. Sorry, you would. I'm sorry.
I think it would be ideal, but in these days, anything less than what we've got, I would take. I
got you. So okay, so I'm sorry. I asked you that for a reason. That's why I was trying to interrupt you, because I was trying to make a point. But my point was that so you would agree that authority is a myth, right?
No, I would say that
the right to rule somebody is not. It doesn't really exist, right? There's no right to rule somebody, right? The moral right to.
I get back to, like, say, basic, like, reality, like self-ownership and humans all existing in the same category as the same basic biological unit. So you'd have to say, well, what gives this person a right that, over the ownership of other people that other people don't have? And I would dismantle those and say, well, there is none. Humans belong in a category, of individuals. And so, yeah, who would you give the right to give force to? So who would you give the right to initiate force to? I wouldn't say, well, yeah, no one.
Okay, so if you, I'll take.
By people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'll take that as a no. So you don't agree that you don't believe in that anyone has a right to rule somebody. So you don't believe in authority, right?
No, I believe in authority if it's earned. Like, if someone's good at what they do, you can say, yeah, well, like, you go to your doctor, you trust his authority because he's earned it. But
yeah. No, I'm not talking about that kind of. Yeah. No, I understand you're trying to you're trying to define how we're using the term and stuff. Like, I understand that. Like, obviously, if somebody knows something about computers and you're trying to fix your Mac because it's making color circle, the little volleyball thing, then
I just shy away from that because I think a lot of people with other emotional issues are attracted to these ideas, and they do have a blanket revulsion to authority.
Mm-hmm.
I like, I'm not like the term anarchist gets bandied around by so many people. They're like, oh, I just don't want rules. I want to be able to do whatever I want, and I'm not like that. I just want the same rules to apply to everybody.
Oh, I totally understand anarchism as far as like I live in New Hampshire, which is the Free State Project. It's full of libertarians, right? So I live down the street from Christopher Cantwell, for example. Okay, so I'm very familiar with the libertarian anarcho-capitalist thing. So when I'm using these terms, just know that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not using them. I'm not going to end up arguing past you. I'm just trying to establish some things so I can understand. So you would agree that in the senses I defined it formally that authority is a myth, right? There's no government that has a right to rule anybody. There's no group of primates who have a right to initiate violence on somebody, right?
Correct. And I would say, too, because self-ownership is objective.
Okay, so
let's come into it as well.
Okay, we'll get there. So I just wanted to outline my problem with libertarians, and my problem is that it's kind of frustrating because libertarians to me are so close. They're red-pilled on some issues, but then when it comes to morality, they have these moral beliefs, and they believe that they can argue. They can use moral arguments to argue people out of to argue out of something. So they'll claim that, for example, that initiating violence is immoral, right? And they'll claim that I don't know, government is immoral. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm saying that libertarians in general make those claims. And that frustrates me, because it frustrates me to see an inconsistency where someone has given up a myth of authority, but then they still cling on to moral dogma, right? And so for me, for somebody I'm sitting there and I'm going...
How's it moral dogma, though?
Well, because I'll explain that. So, like, any kind of moral argument you can make, right? I can squash it flat out by just not sharing your premises, your value premises. So, for example, I could just say, well, I don't agree that killing is immoral, right? Or I don't, right? I don't share your dislike of hierarchy, for example. So, like when you argue, for example, with a feminist, right? She's assuming certain things. And see, because values can only be argued from, not to, right? So you have to assume a value and then argue from that. And all I have to do is reject that value, right? And you have no argument. There's no argument to be made, right? And A.J. Ayer points this out in his book, Language, Truth, and Logic, where he points out that we never actually argue about values. We argue about facts, right? So, and once we don't agree on most of us don't realize this because we grew up in Western civilization, and so certain values are common to us because we grew up in the same kind of civilization, right? If we'd grown up in Viking times, for example, where pride isn't seen as a disvalue, and death in battle is seen as a ultimate virtue, we would have some very different. We would be arguing for very different things, okay? Because we are having different starting points, right? And so, what I'm saying is that a lot of libertarians have some sort of moral belief in some sort of moral realism, okay? And that's what kind of gets me. Like, there's this channel, High Impact Flicks, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with High Impact Flicks, or I'm trying to think of just random YouTubers.
Let's just keep it between us two then. So
yeah.
I'm understanding you're coming from the point of moral realism, and you're saying that people can be red-pilled on so many things, but if you want to red-pill all the way, then there is no objective morality. Is that what you're saying?
Right, and you don't even need morality. You can just stick with categorical imperatives. Just like, well, if we want X, then we ought do Y, right?
Right. So if like I said, if you take away that God is mandating something, or that other humans have a right to create rules over other people, like all nature is given us as the state of nature, so I agree with that. But if you were going to say, I'm just interested, if someone came to you and wanted to kill you, would you say that's wrong, or would you say, oh well, my time has come, I'll fight to the death, or not?
Well, if you're asking me to be, in the moment, I might, use shorthand language. I might say that it's wrong if I think that I could. I'm sorry. If I think that I have some chance in influencing the person who's trying to kill me, I might use moral language in order to get my way, right? But if you're asking me to be specific and be honest, I would say no. I don't believe that it's true that it's wrong to kill me. I'm just expressing a negative emotion or attitude about that person trying to kill me, because people hate what goes against their goals, their value premises, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, if there is one thing that every living thing is going to share, it's going to be some, imperative to life. And you don't have to have that. I'm just saying it just seems to be something that everybody values.
Yeah, most people, except for those people that kill themselves.
Yeah, except for those, yeah. But as a general thing, most living organisms in life try to live and reproduce. So I guess what I'm saying is you can say that, and yeah, you're right, I can't contradict you if you say, well, someone comes to kill me, and if, like, I can't objectively, universally say that it's conceptually, quote, wrong or evil, but because of your desire to live in the moment, you might try to influence that other person with morality. And that's where I'm really getting to with what I guess my goal is that there is, you know, the state of nature is moral nihilism, I guess, and I agree. But if you were to say to the other person, you were to say, well I'm going to try and influence their behavior.
Well, so far, though, but so far you seem to be actually arguing like a moral nihilist. You haven't claimed that morality is objective, unless I'm incorrect on that. And you haven't claimed that there's moral truth, right? You seem to be just saying...
What I'm saying, and this is probably more the way I see it, so I agree with you on that premise, but if you were to come, say someone's come to your house, or you're out in the middle of town or in your community and someone goes to kill you and say, don't do that, that's wrong. I'm just in a hypothetical. You could talk someone out of it on the basis of morality. Then if the next day you were to turn around and do that to someone else, I could point to everyone else that by your own logic you've contradicted yourself, and therefore you should suffer whatever sanction or whatever you would impose upon anyone else for your own life. So that's what I mean. It's not, you can't blatantly contradict yourself. Now, most people are happy to say, if I go and dig a hole, that hole is mine. If I go and buy a house, that's my property.
But isn't that assuming that consistency is a value?
Yeah, but if you wanted to be honest, like...
Yeah, exactly,
say,
yeah.
Like, I could come along to you and say, what this person is doing, and I think this is the great power of Rand and also Stefan, is that they say, well, this person is using the idea of morality but completely contradicting themselves, therefore you don't need to play that game, and obviously you could, you know, in a lot of ways it's about getting a lot of people together or choosing to associate with people who do care about having non-contradictory beliefs. If I started walking around society saying, I believe the money in my pocket is my property and you can't take that, but then I took other people's money, they'd be like, well, it's pretty clear what's going on. So a lot of these, and in the same way, that's what's talking about the truth by revelation, the guy is saying, if you reveal truth, it's wrong. If I reveal truth, it's true. And that's just a thinly veiled, that's just a thinly veiled biological imperative to gather resources to yourself. You know what I mean? That is biology, and that is the state of nature. And I guess I do agree that in the world we live in today, it is the facade of morality. People claim universals, but then claim exemptions to their own universals. Because if some person said, well, I'm sorry, America just wants to go and invade another country just because we can, or they were like, well, we're just going to get resources for our own people, you would understand what was going on, and then things would devolve into a complete shit show because other people were acting the same way. But what you have to claim is, or in the same way that if you were to say to the preacher who says, well, I claim by revelation X, he completely loses his power over you if you say, yeah, but I can claim the opposite of X in the same way, and they're both equal in validity because you don't have any power that I don't have. Do you know what I mean? So I agree with you, the state of nature is moral nihilism, but you can get a fair way down to pointing at people's self-contradictions and saying, well, if you can say, okay, I think that a person's self-ownership over their body is an objective reality, but you could say, well, people, just because you're in control of your own body and it exists because you choose for it to exist and you maintain it, you could posit an ethic that says, but we can violate that as we like. But you've got no basis logically to say that shouldn't apply to you either. Do you know what I mean? So I agree with you in the state of nature, but if we want to elevate ourselves above being beasts in a state of nature, I would hope that people can understand that people often claim the universality of morals, but then create separate categories, and it's a thinly veiled attempt to gather resources for their own biological self-interest.
So you would agree that and this is a question, you would agree that it's not logically contradictory, right? It's not anti-logic to claim that pain is preferable to pleasure, over pleasure, death over life, sickness over health, right? You would agree that that's not logically contradictory. We can choose to value anything we want.
Look,
without it being.
I don't know if it fits together into a concrete kind of proof in a sense, but I will say that you can look at what most people say, and most people are going to claim, like if you say, okay, I'm moral nihilist, but have you ever met a person truly, or what percentage of people have you ever met that say, I don't believe in morality whatsoever? Most people, when things happen to them, have some sort of moral conception in the same way that most people prefer life and say.
Well, that would be practical nihilism. Okay, so let me see if I can distinguish this. So there's theoretical nihilism. A theoretical moral nihilism is that morality is subjective, and then there's practical nihilism, which is a kind of morality, or rather a moral nihilism that says there are no values whatsoever, okay? That's different. I'm not talking about that kind. I'm talking about morality is just subjective. So we're just, and this kind of goes back to Schopenhauer's contention with Kant, where for Kant, moral imperatives, oughts, right, prescriptions, were not something you did to avoid something. It wasn't like, I'm not going to kill because I don't want to, go to prison, or because I want to avoid social consequences, or something like that. Moral and ought was, you just ought not do that, right? And so Schopenhauer came along and says, well, that makes no logical sense, because every imperative, every ought implies an end, right? It implies a goal. So without a subjective goal, without an if clause, imperatives make no sense, and thus moral imperatives don't exist. Thus morality in that sense doesn't exist, right? It exists, but it's subjective. It has no basis, right?
No, I wouldn't say it's subjective, because if Schopenhauer wanted to claim objective morals, if something was going to be actioned against him, then he doesn't logically have any way to do that. You know what I mean? Like I said, if he says, well, morality is subjective, I mean, how many people are going to hang out with someone that says I can do what I want and I don't? The only reason I'm not going to do it is because I will be punished. Like that's not going to be acceptable for the vast majority of people, because I think people want to agree on a thing. And like I was saying, yeah, maybe there's no logical sort of is that can give you that ought, but you can use people's own preferences and at least universally.
Right, but then that's just going to beg the question, and that's what Schopenhauer's getting at. Like, if I say you ought not kill, that begs the question, why? Right? I mean, anyone can make an assertion, but if you don't, if you don't, in other words, an ought is a directive, right? And if there's no reason, then there can't be an ought, right?
No, but I'm saying that I'm at the start of this journey, and I think it will go a long way, but really the reason why somebody should not kill is not as important to me as pointing out that if a person claims that they can't be killed, then they should apply logically that to someone else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I get that you're all about universalizing and not being contradictory. Like I understand all of that, right?
Yeah.
So and we don't have any disagreement there, right?
Okay.
Like I agree that there can be logically contradictory things, like murder is wrong, but then I go and murder somebody, right? Or killing is wrong, and then I go kill somebody. Like, we agree that can't. If that argument is going to hold, or it's not an argument, it's an assertion. But if I'm going to say that murder is wrong, or let me say like this. If I'm going to say that, well, first of all, I would say that murder is wrong isn't communicating a truth, right? It's just expressing an emotion about the physical event known as killing, or a particular kind of killing, which we call murder, right? But
humans can correct an ethic.
But we can't have a world in which, in other words, a thing's not going to work. If everybody in society is just killing somebody else, we can't really have a society. So if our goal is to have a society, then, right, then our goal is to accomplish something, if we have some sort of goal in mind, then we have to do what is conducive, exhibit behaviors that are conducive to that goal. Right?
Yeah.
No,
well, I mean,
moral nihilists don't even disagree with anything I just said. Like, you can be a moral nihilist and do everything you're doing here, right? And not even talk about morality. You can just say, I don't like killing, or we don't. If you don't want to have a world in which, or if you want to have maximal freedom, if you want to have a society in which there exists maximal freedom, then there ought not be a state, right? There ought not be initiatory force, right? Yeah. You could do all of that from moral nihilism. Moral nihilism is just a meta-ethical, position.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I probably agree. Like, when, we evolved on this planet, was there anything in objective reality that prescribed morals to it? And no, I'm not aware that there was. But most people are happy.
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that last part?
Well, when we evolved on this planet, was there anything in objective reality that prescribed morals to us? I'm not aware that there was. So right. I probably would agree with you on that. But most people want to own their bodies, and most people want to own property, and you can't objectively say that whatever properties one human being exhibits, say like self-ownership, you can't say that another person that doesn't prescribe self-ownership to them, so you can be non-contradictory in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So if I say, well, like I own my body, and like as I say, well, if my mind makes a choice and my body performs that choice and I go and create property, like whether it's a whole or do a day at work and create some money, then that exists as a result of my choice and my action in the same way that my body does. Therefore, it's an external property, but it's still a category of property. That's non-contradictory. And if another person owns their body in the same way I do, which they do, then there's nothing in reality that I can point to that gives me a category different to them, in the same way there's nothing a preacher can point to that gives his revelation a category different to my revelation.
So if, I guess what I'm trying to understand here is, you seem to move from, so you seem to use property and or ownership in like two different ways, right? Mm-hmm. One is the fact of being able to move your arms and feed yourself, for example, mm-hmm. right? Or continuing to exist. Like, this is a physical descriptive reality, right? And then you seem to use to own something in a prescriptive manner, which is what is kind of puzzling to me. So, like, when you say, for example, someone owns a car, right? What does that exactly mean? What does that mean that you own a car?
Well, they have exclusive use of that.
So, are you saying it's the physical act? You're just describing a physical act that you happen to possess something? To physically possess something? To physically control something? Is that what you mean?
No.
Because then somebody could just take your car and they say, well, I have physical possession right now of it, so, right?
No, so, like, if you, like I said, you exist, and you choose to exist, therefore the fact that you exist, like, remember, I think you commented on the thing saying that ghost in the machine. I just use that as a throwaway phrase because I don't really care about the distinction with whether you've got a soul or consciousness has evolved or something, but for whatever it is in us that makes a choice, wherever our personality or consciousness is, it makes a choice for our body to live, and it makes a choice for us to thrive and keep living. Therefore, we exist as a result of our choice. Now, if I go and do a day of work, no one else performed that labour, no one else chose and performed that labour than I did. You know what I mean? You can't say, well, someone else has done a day of work, therefore that money goes to someone else, because it's a value created by you, and money is a representation of human value. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, but I understand, like you're describing...
It exists because you created it. So if you have a car, like say you go and work for 2 years, that whatever value is created by your labour, you own it, and therefore you can trade your property. So if you trade that property for a car, you've earned it, obviously, the same way that people own association with other people, or own association with other people. It's a voluntary
Okay, so
trade.
let me get... I'm trying to get at something. Let me give you a scenario here. So let's say that you say, hey, I-Theist, why don't you come over and rake my yard and I'll give you $5, right? So I go and I rake your yard, right? There's a physical act of raking your yard, right?
Yeah.
Now, from that act, how can you get some sort of, you ought to give him $5? I guess this is where I'm trying to figure out, where do you get from these collection of facts, like you occupying your car, you having physical possession of it, to you ought or ought not do something. Someone else ought or ought not do something to the car, right?
Why wouldn't I give you the $5? I guess, yeah, because you want to live in a society where if you agree on something, people do what they should, and if you don't do that, then you should be ostracized by everyone else who does want to do that.
So what I'm getting at is, are you deriving some sort of prescription from the fact of possessing something, right? So like when you say that you own your car, do you just mean that you have physical possession of it?
No, because someone can take it and have physical possession of it, but it is, you have earned it, therefore it is, it was voluntarily traded.
Okay, so then from the fact that you have paid money for the car, which is representing of value, which is subjective, but that's another story. So you have paid money, you have done a physical exchange of exchanging money for a piece of metal. And I'm asking, how do you get how do you derive an ought from that? How do you derive, well, because I have paid for this car, right? In other words, are you deriving an ought from that, prescription from that, or are you deriving it from some secret hidden premise that you're just not disclosing? Some value, right?
Trying to have a think about this.
Because it would seem... I'll try to make this easier on you. It would seem to me that you're not actually deriving a value, if we're going to be logical, from the fact of physically owning. Obviously, you've already conceded that, and not from the fact of the physical exchange of money, because that would be an is-ought fallacy. So you can't derive a prescription from that. So then you must be assuming that violating an agreement is a disvalue, right? So, in other words, the agreement, the unspoken agreement, it may be an unspoken agreement. Here, I'll give you $5 and you do my lawn, right? There may be an unspoken agreement between us, right? And so you're assuming that, so you're not actually deriving from a fact of ownership, or I shouldn't say ownership, possessing or occupying a certain space. You're deriving it from the if we want to be able to trust one another, right? Because obviously if everyone's lying to one another, then there can be no agreements, because no one's going to believe anything that anybody says, right? So it's if you want to have a relationship with me in which we exchange goods and we are both happy with that exchange, right? then you ought give me the $5. Then I ought give you the $5 like I said, right?
Yeah,
but it's not deriving it from the physical fact of exchanging money for work. It's from the hidden premise, the value for integrity or.
Now that I think about it, I think the relation to the physical reality is about being able to correctly identify things that belong in the same category. You know what I mean? So if somebody labors and exchanges money, you go like, that is, they earned that money, it's their property, it's voluntarily traded, blah, blah, blah. But if someone else goes, but in this category, someone else labors or, say, mows my lawn, I'm supposed to give them $5, they go, but that's in a different category. You know what I mean? In the same way, we're talking about like once again, the revelation sort of thing, like, is there anything in that physical instance that allows it to be put in a different category to everyone else? No. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably more why I always point out, like, the facts, the physical facts and happenings in instances, is so that you can look at putting it in the same category as everyone else. And so, once again, like, if you're going to go back to government or whatever, so, well, if 99% of the transactions in society people accept as being earned because they're voluntary, then someone comes along and goes for this involuntary thing or whatever. Like, say, just a really easy example, if people go, well, I'm going to get $5 for mowing lawns, and everyone goes around and does that, then someone comes up and mugs someone sticks a gun in their ribs and goes, well, I'm going to get $5 by mugging you. We would go, there's a different category there because obviously the agreement, the intention, the actions, that one's non-voluntary, therefore it can be put in a different category.
Right. So the hidden premise is that involuntary is a disvalue, right? In that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that is magically spurned by Mother Nature or objective reality in any way, but I'm more interested in pointing out that through 99% of people's interactions, that's the standard that they require and agree upon. So in a sense, maybe you can't derive morals from objective reality in that way, but we can certainly agree on them and have them be non-contradictory. So then, in the same way that a society as a whole goes, the mugger's not right, because people are never going to say that a mugging has earned the money in the same way that mowing the lawn has. We all agree upon that, and we're happy to agree upon that, so that's fine. But it's more about when you get things like to do with government or whatever, it is a facade. There's a mugging under a facade of being something else, but you go back to the objective reality to see if it can logically be put in the right category. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like one example may be, people claim that government is just because it rules by consent. So they'll argue about tacit consent, like in contract theory, for example, right? By existing in this particular geographic region, you are agreeing to this particular group of violent primates to be able to initiate force on you, and all of that stuff, right? But then you point out, well,
easier example. So because that's a little bit harder, because then you have to talk about natural law and how you could even, homestead land and how you would actually own a geographical area and things like that. But probably easier is people go, well, the tax may be involuntary, but they hurt the poor. And so then you'd say, well, the mugger is also involuntary. So is that mugging moral? Like, is it the good if he says, well, I'm going to mug you, but half the money I mug off you, I'm going to give to poor people?
Right. Or here's another one.
And most people would say no, therefore you can apply that same physical instance. So that's the value of looking at things in reality, objective self-ownership, objective voluntary trade of properties, to be able to categorize things properly so that they don't self-contradict.
Right, like there's an inconsistency I see with, statists a lot, which is, for example, they abhor rape, right? They abhor gang rape. And yet they are... democratarian. They agree with democracy, which is gang rape, right? It is the majority raping a doing something against someone's will, minority's will, right? And they say, well, it's representative democracy, though. Say, well, okay, well, that's like me tag teaming some guys. Say, you represent me to go rape that girl, right?
Exactly. So that's a very popular comparison. We'd say, well, self-ownership is an objective premise, and obviously what you ought to do with that objective premise, I'm not saying that there's an objective moral, but if you want to say, that's why we point out the rape versus theft thing, is that you're going to say, no, you can't rape a woman because her body is her property, and say, well, why is her body a property? Why does she own her body? And can these same instances not be applied to money and labour and physical property external to the body? Therefore, it can be put in the same category as rape. And then it's not so much that I'm sort of saying that reality has spurned an ethic objectively, but it's about using people's self-contradiction and say, well,
Sure. You can, if you're
not valid in the same way that democratic rape would not be valid.
Sure. Like if you're not, thinking this way, you can end up with blunders like the consent of the governed, right? Which is an oxymoron, because you govern means to rule by violent force, right? The use of force, and so it is by definition not consent, right? It's not something that is being done on somebody willingly, right? It is something that is being forced upon them. So there can't be a consent of the governed, because that's a contradiction in terms, right?
Yeah, or like say with the social contract, to say, well, because you agreed to the social contract, and so you look at the physical properties in reality of any other contract, and you can go, here's where I walked into the shop. We agree that that's objective reality, that I walked into this business premise and I signed this thing and there's a physical manifestation of paper. But another contract that just magically exists, you go, well, in one instance of contract, something physically exists and I've actually signed it and we all agree that that's the past and that's a true representation of what happened. But it differs in the social contract because you can't show a piece of paper, there was no consent, I'd agree to it, all these different things. And so the pointing out the reality of the situation, or the physical reality, is about being able to categorize things properly according to other things that people take for granted, and therefore using that self-contradiction to get people to rethink what they're saying.
Right. Now, you had mentioned natural law. Is that correct?
Yeah, I haven't read a lot of it. I'm trying to get through Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. That's quite a slow read, but also just starting to look into John Locke. I'm working my way through the philosophers, but the idea, just came up, and I think I'm not too sure, but I've seen it obviously bandied about Locke's all men being equal, each has a right to life, liberty, and property or something.
Right. I'd like to caution you, because I have actually in my book on metaethics, I've done a section on natural law, and I actually do briefly touch on Locke, and then I move into a more contemporary natural law theory, which was coined by Rothbard, for example.
Yeah.
And the problem with natural law is that every instance that I've seen of it, and there are so many natural laws out there, theories, that it's not even funny, but everyone that I've ever looked at, and I'll just use Rothbard as an example, commits the is-ought fallacy. So they'll move from facts about human nature to prescriptions, right?
Right.
And they're not revealing any kind of hidden premise or any hidden value premise, like if you want X, right? They're just trying to argue from facts about human nature to prescriptions about how humans ought to behave or ought not behave. And that's a problem. So that's what I would just caution you against.
Sure.
When they start moving from facts about human nature to decrees, watch that term, especially with Locke or Rothbard. That's where you run into some logical errors there, because that's like arguing, it's like arguing I've evolved the wife beater gene, therefore I ought to beat my wife, or something like that.
Right.
Humans have evolved the characteristic of aggression, therefore they ought to be aggressive, right? It doesn't work, right?
No, I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. That doesn't make sense.
So yeah, so I just caution you about that, and you'd mentioned that, so I figured I would just touch on that. But I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation, because there are a lot of people that, like, I comment on a lot of different videos.
Sure.
And so not everyone has the balls, should I say, to have a Skype conversation. I think a lot of people are shy or something. I mean, I've had a lot of them over the years, but I'm saying, like, if you were to count all the people that I've said, hey, let's have a discussion about this, let's define terms, right? Which is why I'm saying let's have a Skype discussion, because on Skype, I think you can get a lot out of the way in a shorter amount of time than in text. And it's also, you're less likely to misread tone, right? You can actually hear the sound of someone's voice and know that they're not being snarky, for example, or whatever. And I think it just gives you more time to really sit down and define, okay, well, what do you mean by this? Because what I find is that a lot of times people just end up arguing past each other because they're using the same terms, but they're using them differently, right?
Yeah.
So that's...
And, like, it's, we all, and, me especially, shouldn't give up the opportunity to learn something, hear another perspective as well. So, in my ideal society, people would, like, as I said, in a voluntary society, people want to resolve disputes with discussion and debate. And so it would be a bit hypocritical of me to not want to do the same. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Like I write. I published a book, and it's concerning metaethics, and it explains pretty much everything that we've talked about in this conversation. So I'm very interested in communicating what I've learned over the years and concerning metaethics, and and breaking it down in such a way that even people who are not, philosophically knowledgeable, laymen, so to speak, can, I try to write in such a way that they can grasp these things that would otherwise be inaccessible, to them.
I think you have to do that, because there's no point. I never really cared about philosophy until I started hearing ways that it applied to my life.
Right. Well, when you make your way over to Nietzsche, feel free to give me another call, because he's one of my specialties. I have studied Nietzsche for a long time, and I've actually written a chapter in my book on Nietzsche's Wille zur Macht, or will to power, and his concept of slave versus master morality. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you want to? I'm sort of thinking, like, I agree with you that obviously nature cannot prescribe an ought. I agree. And so in that sense of moral nihilism, maybe I'll learn more things and maybe I'll find out something later on. But as I stand today, yes, I agree with you. Nature does not prescribe morality. But would you then also agree, though, that if people say, I want to be able to work and earn money, and I want to be able to own the product of my labor, and I want to be able to trade that voluntarily with other people, then we can use these to point out if someone else is contradicting that same thing, their own preference, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think you even need to ask that question. I've pointed out that, that there can be contradictions. Like I gave you some with consent of the governed, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or, any of that stuff. So, I mean, we agree that there are cogent ways, consistent ways in which you can apply principles, right? But the only contention was that it's just that I think what happened was, and this isn't anyone's fault. I think what happened is that you were using more realist language, and I took it as you were buying into everything that that you were basically arguing from Locke and buying into the doctrine of, being able to prescribe, nature being able to, description being able to be, or prescription being derived from description, right? And also, I thought you had I thought you were doing that with, so deriving prescriptions from facts about the physical fact of being able to move your arm or continue to live, right? Or the physical act of, utilizing a piece of machinery like a car or something, right? And so because the way your arguments were phrased, they weren't as specific, right, as maybe I would have been, because I'm trained to be that specific, but you're not, and that's okay. Most people aren't, and that's fine. I just have to be, in what I do, I have to be a little more concerned about that kind of thing, because, if you don't, so for example, in philosophy, a lot of times we'll use arguments like, if I want X, I ought to do Y, and things like that, right? Or if P, then Q, right? Because we're showing the form of our argument in such a way that it can't be misunderstood, right? So the if clause represents that I am deriving it from the if I want, the value, right? And not from the fact. So for example, I can describe, Johnny works at Bob's Pet Shop. Johnny likes to kick puppies for fun. He kicks puppies in the back. And then I say, Johnny ought not kick puppies because it harms puppies. And because it harms the owner's business, right? Well, if that's my argument, it's not going to work. Because from the fact that it harms puppies doesn't do anything for us. We can't derive a prescription from that. And from the fact that it harms his owner doesn't, or his employer doesn't do anything. But if I say, Johnny does all these things, and if Johnny doesn't want to lose his job, and if Johnny doesn't want to harm puppies, then Johnny ought not kick puppies, right? That works, right? Because I'm deriving it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And my sort of thing, which I've been focused on so far, is trying to say that if Johnny loves his own puppy and says that nobody should ever kick it or hurt it, and should they do that, that would be completely unacceptable, and that person would rightly receive sanctions, and that would be, quote, the evil, then Johnny can't logically go and kick someone else's puppy, claiming it also to be the good when he does it.
Right. Well, that's only if Johnny is saying that kicking all puppies. Like Johnny could just say kicking my puppies is unacceptable, right?
He could say that, but then everyone else is going to say, well, thanks for the clarification. Remind us to get our puppy in your vicinity, and I think that would be fine too. And that person would be ostracized from a society that values puppies. Right.
No, we agree there. I'm just saying that he could he could logically do so. It wouldn't be a contradiction in terms, right? It's just he's working under different, value premises. Whereas you're universalizing values. Like I understand what you're trying to do. I totally understand that framework. I'm just not I'm seeing the loopholes because I don't do that. I'm Nietzschean, so I don't really apply universal value. I don't like universalized values really. So for me, it's a little different. But
what is your base value then?
What do you mean base value? I mean, I have values like I
what
would
values you work from?
Well, I would argue that life is will to power. So I would argue that each life seeks power, and that sense morality is subjective. There really isn't any objective thing that I ought to do, only in contingent on my values. So I live my life. So people that I value, I treat them in such a way that I know that it's not going to harm them because I value them, right? I treat them in such a way that I can have a relationship with them, right? Because that's conducive to my goal, right? And so I that's why I do it. I don't do it out of any morality or immorality in an objective sense. I just do it because it's conducive, right? If I don't want to go to jail, then I ought not commit a crime, right? That just makes sense. If I don't want to, mine is very consequential. Like if I don't.
So if the structures and consequences that you abide by were removed, and something were to happen to you, you may not like it, but you wouldn't call it wrong.
I might call it wrong if I can get away with it. If someone believes that there is something called wrong and I can use that to manipulate them, I might use it. Sure. Depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, but you wouldn't believe it, beyond a manipulation to be objectively wrong.
No. And I don't mean manipulation necessarily in the sense of lying or I don't think that humans think about how they use these terms enough to really even think about whether what they're saying is true or false, right? I don't think most people use language that cognitively, right? They don't really think about these things, right? They're not trained to think about these things. And so
sorry, you go.
I don't think that people are manipulating each other, and I'm even kind of cautioned in using that word, but I don't think that people are using these terms necessarily to manipulate people, but they are, okay, emotionally, because they're communicating sentiments. So in other words, stealing is wrong can also mean I disapprove of stealing, do so as well, right? We use moral language to influence and change other people's attitudes about certain actions or facts or whatever, right? That's how we communicate. It's not true. It's not a truth. It's not like there's air in the room, right? It's so we wouldn't say it's true, but it's not false either. I'm not lying to anybody, right? I'm just expressing how I feel about X, right?
But if you were going to say like stealing's wrong and then you steal, isn't it? And you're using the moral language to influence the behavior of other people.
Right. If I say stealing's wrong in general, then there's going to be a contradiction if I go steal, right? But if I'm just saying stealing is wrong for me or stealing is wrong for Joe over here, right? Then I'm not applying that universally. I'm just saying it's just wrong for that person.
Yeah, sure. But then I would come along if you were to say that in our little town, and I would say, well, like once again, like the preacher, well, what instance in reality allows him to prescribe a standard to himself and not to other people, and we would struggle to find.
Well, okay. Let me put it this way. Because this will kind of help you see where I'm getting at. So, like, if I say I like chocolate ice cream, right? Chocolate ice cream is good, right? Am I saying that everyone ought to like chocolate ice cream or that chocolate ice cream is good for everyone? No, I'm just saying that I prefer chocolate ice cream. There's no, and then if someone goes and eats chocolate ice cream, I'm not going to say that they're wrong for liking chocolate ice cream, right?
Yeah, but so you're talking about the Nietzschean will to power, then, what I would sort of say to other people is, once again, if you said, stealing from me is wrong, if I steal from you, it's good, then... And you're not contradicting yourself, but I would say, well, it's using moral language, but what's really going on is your will to power, your biological self-interest.
Language and, morality is about power, not about truth, right? It's about influencing people, getting people to do something that you want them to do. Like when I say will to power... Let's define power. Power is an ability, so it could be an ability to adapt to a given environment. Maybe you have an ability to turn green and blend into a leaf, or it could be power like physical power, like being able to overpower somebody physically. It could be a woman's using her attractiveness to manipulate somebody to get something, from them. Power is basically just defined as ability. So morality, as I would argue, is not about truth, but it's about power. It's about getting people to do what you want them to do. So is logic. So is arguments. Arguments is about trying to convince somebody to do something that you want them to do. And so when you're talking about the non-aggression principle and all that, what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to change that person's sentiments and show them that if you want to be consistent, then you can't talk about contractarianism. You can't talk about the right to rule, because these things are incoherent. And then you're going to point that out, and they're going to say, okay, well, and they may or may not, because there's something called the will to truth. Like Nietzsche pointed out that truth is only valuable to someone when it's valuable, right? Someone who has a religious belief, for example, you could throw all of the arguments at them to show them that their belief is wrong, right? But it's never going to convince them unless they value truth, right? Because people believe, much of what people believe is false. They believe it because it grants them power. So, like, for example, occult's dogmas may grant someone power by being in an in-group, right? And so by being in an in-group, they have a social network where if they lose their job, they can go stay over at this cult member's house, or some sort of benefit like that, right? There's some sort of benefit by believing something, by being in an in-group. And so unless that person values consistency and truth, right, and they're not going to do that unless it becomes powerful for them. So, like, for example, there may be circumstances that a person is in which knowing truth he may lose power. Or do you see what I'm saying? And so that's what will to power is about. Is that power is the kind of ultimate telos, if you will. It's not objective, but it is something that all life seeks, right? Subconsciously and and consciously. So like every tree seeks, unconsciously stretches towards the rays of the sun. Like you walk in the woods and you see that some trees are growing in a certain distance, and they're all battling each other for the rays of the sun, for life, for that ability to live, right? And so this is what you see with politics. Politics is all about will to power. It's all about one group using the violent social mechanism known as the state, the gun in the room, to initiate, to impose its will on everybody else, right? So all politics is about will to power.
And I agree with you that obviously most people will not adopt an ethic if it goes against their biological self-interest or will to power or will to truth. I agree with that. So I generally wouldn't be speaking to those people. I would be speaking to the people who do have this, for want of a better word, spell cast over them that thinks that they need to put their own biological self-interest secondary to someone else's because of this facade of morality. I wouldn't be talking to that person. I wouldn't be talking to the politician. I'd be talking to the people that they're governing. Say, well, this is contradictory. So if you want to have a universal ethic, if you want to have a non-contradictory ethic, it would have to be universalizable, and therefore, voluntary trade can be. This person is acting in their own will to power, while convincing you of the opposite, that's self-contradictory. So you don't need to listen to that.
Right, and this kind of gets into herd morality, which seems to be what you're kind of advocating here, which is a kind of herd morality. Herd morality is basically it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with a claim to objectivity or truth, but it has to do with who the morality benefits. And you're trying to you have a morality that is supposed to have like maximal freedom for the most amount of people, right? So like if nobody initiated force, right, and we just had voluntary interactions, then that would be, we could agree, maximal freedom for the most amount of people, correct? right? And so it would end this tug of war of people trying. I mean, if this were possible, I don't think it is, but that's an argument from human nature. But if it were possible, that everyone in the world could be like this or would be like this, is I think it's logically possible. So it could be, but you get what I'm saying. I would say that it's obviously herd morality in that sense. An egoistic morality is very different, like a master morality, which is, very, very different, where there's hierarchy and there's, I know that libertarianism has hierarchy in a sense, but I'm meaning that in a sense like, Nietzsche's conception of the Übermensch or the higher man, where he defines, like there's this aristocratic. Nietzsche was very aristocratic, right? And I'm quite aristocratic myself. And so I look at, and this is going to sound really, because from our conversation, I can tell that you hold very different values. So, I would say in some ways, but I would say that, I kind of like have a different thing. Like, I don't think it's realistic that the non-aggression principle will ever be grasped by all society. And I'm not sure that I would want that. I think that for me, a rule of the best, and I don't mean the richest, right? And I actually think that that's what an Ancapistan would end up being, is a plutocracy, but that's another story. I think that the non-mediocre people who are pretty much rare when you compare them as a group to the rest of the world should rule over other people. I think that humans are naturally hierarchical, right? And so that's how it would work, right? Is that you would have hierarchy, you would have because I think that the nature of life is will to power. I think there will always be a power vacuum, and so there will always be somebody trying to rule over a given populace, or a group of people ruling over a given populace. And so I think you're either going to have an aristocracy or you're going to have what we have now, which is basically what I would argue is, well, in the United States at least, herd rule to some extent. And what I mean by that is that, okay, so the best way to describe, so I have ferrets, right? And ferrets are, what they are is they are a population of polecats that were abducted a long time ago, and they were tamed before dogs, before we even domesticated dogs, right? And we've been genetically modifying them through selective breeding for thousands of years, for a long time. And we've made them very docile, okay? And we've made them to where if you look at a weasel, one of these, they're a type of weasel, but if you look at them in the wild, they're bigger, they're stronger, and they're very aggressive, and they're solitary. But ferrets, since they are a modified population, have become more dog-like, right? And they're not aggressive. They're in general, they're very friendly. Certainly, much more friendlier than a polecat if you were to go get one wild. And it's because they've been selected, right? Our values for these ferrets of how we wanted them to be dictated our selective breeding practices. So what I think what democracy does is it creates ferrets out of humans. What it does is it domesticates humans, and it takes them from being that virile beast, that conquering beast, and makes them into docile, easily controlled. That's what I think that democracy and over-civilization is doing to humanity. So I'm against that. I have different value premises, right? And I think in order to have, you need hierarchy. In order to have, to have a higher man, if you will, from my subjective standards, that you cannot have the conditions, the political conditions that we have today. Now that's going to seem very cold, and a lot of, it's going to seem different it's going to seem offensive to most people, because most people have the, let's face it, most people have the values they have because of the soil that they've evolved in, that they have grown up in, right?
Sure.
So to a lot of people, that's going to seem very, offensive. But so that's where I'm coming from. I'm not. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So I think that if human beings near universally, or at least the vast majority of people, did not have a ability to desire or value freedom, that would be very interesting information to have.
Right.
And I don't think that I would ignore that information if it were ever demonstrable or provable. I think for me, when I said, am I a minarchist or an anarchist or whatever, I think there is a difference between taking a consequentialist position before deriving some principles, or having principles and then backtracking a bit from them because life just isn't like that. And so for me, if I was going to talk to statists or whatever, and obviously like Ancapistan is, anarcho-capitalism is, like you said, it's logically consistent, but quite a radical change. But I think it can be useful in today's world to derive some principle, or at least you get people to say that there is some notion that just because the government does it doesn't mean it's suddenly moral. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, having said that, though, like in my personal preference, there would still have to be governance, but smaller and competing more, local governance. And in a lot of ways, I think back to like the American system, the constitutional system, and think, well, how brilliant it is, because people are going to need governance in some way, but you would hopefully think that because of competition between governing bodies, that would people be able to vote with their feet. That's obviously in a lot of ways what the American system was. However, if you think like that people are going to, basically, I think what you're saying like may be true. I value freedom, and therefore I would, even if that were true, I would probably campaign to get people who also value freedom to compete with that society, or if that's even true, that maybe there would be an opt-out from people who wanted that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree, like kind of like pan-successionism, like something like that, like where you have like an Ancapistan or a small government stand, whatever, and you have like that option, right? And like and then like someone in the next region over could have their socialism if they wanted that, right? But they could also leave and come over to where you're at. And like it's just that I have a very different conception of human nature. Like I think that most people are herd animals and slave animals. And what I mean by that is that they will always demand masters. If there are none, they will create them. They'll create a god, a sky daddy god, master, or they'll create a government of some sort. Like I think it was Ragnar Redbeard who wrote in Might is Right. He wrote that give these people 24 hours and they'll vote themselves a new master. Within that time, because most people are herd animals, and very few actually want sovereignty. And that's why we have the system that we have, because people are, because humanity is hierarchical, and most people are docile ferrets, and they want, they're like, maybe that's not even the best analogy, but they are, they want something to give them, like, for example, that's why theories such as objective morality exist, because people want some external standard to give them meaning. They want some external standard to tell them what they ought to do. They can't just accept that what I ought to do is what I want to do and what I can do. It's subjective, right? If I want X, I ought to do Y. They cannot deal with that. So they have to create some sort of sky daddy that gives them some sort of meaning and purpose to their life, right? They cannot stomach being their own God in that sense. And so that's why the term of my channel is I-Theist, by the way. And so, okay, so like, that's all that I'm saying. And like, I don't try to universalize my values. I don't try to say everyone should be like me, because I realize that not everyone can be like me. It's just not in their nature, right? And so I don't even try to universalize values, and I just look after those people, and I care about those people who are in my in-group, right? And so I don't like when someone gets bombed over in Afghanistan, it doesn't affect me. I don't put on some pretense about caring about them. I've never met them. I don't care about them, right? It's not going to affect me. And I'm just honest about that.
I don't have an emotional reaction to that, because that's so common that I can't afford to have an emotional reaction to every time someone else in the world gets killed. Because then I'll just sacrifice my own life, and I care about myself more than I care about other people. But I do care about universalization, so logically I wish that that didn't have to happen.
Right. Yeah, no, I get you. I'm just saying that, like, I understand, like, you know, where you're coming from on that, and, you know, we're just coming from different places.
Sure.
But I'm glad that we could, you know, have this discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is very interesting. I had a chat recently about the with True to Tom, and we sort of ended up, and he said, I think we were talking about whether people do en masse, like in the majority, have an ability to accept universalization over biological self-interest, or I guess in your case, will to power. He said, I don't think they do. I don't know. I don't know how you collect that information, but would change my behaviour if it could be proved either way. If people don't, if what you're saying is true, like I said to True to Tom as well, it's probably a great argument to run for politics. You know?
Yeah.
And that may be the case. It's definitely something I want to have a lot more time thinking about. But I would probably want to wrap up with saying that in this case, I do value, like for me at the moment, I do value universalization. I do value logical non-contradiction, as we've talked about. And I am interested in throwing those arguments out into the world to find the people who also value those things.
Right. Well, I mean, in order to have a conversation, you have to, you know, presuppose these values, like, you know, being logical and rational and stuff, right?
Yeah. But even in my own life too, if what you're saying is true, people are inherently herd animals, I would like to attract to me people who share my values. I don't know what I'll do that in the future, but it's definitely a good start. And people who want to live under aristocracies, if they want to do that, that's fine. Hopefully if they ever got their way, they would like to leave us universalists alone and do our own thing. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But I think for me it's a logical exercise in getting some principles that can be universal and consistent, as we talked about.
Right.
Definitely interested to see where that sort of takes me, you know, from here forward. Having said that, in any real world sense, I would take any of that over what we have today.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Like, you know, I would probably take an Ancapistan over what we have today, right?
Yeah.
Because at least that is somewhat hierarchical. We could have that, like, you know, where it's like a meritocracy, right? But
and I agree with you almost in this kind of hierarchy. Like, if an aristocracy formed voluntarily, I would be fine with that, because that's, you know, once again, I hold voluntarism, voluntary interaction as a value. So if the people who were, quote, the better humans, who, like the Steve Jobs and the people who create all this cool stuff, did so and gathered wealth and the most competent rose to the top of society, I think that would be fine if it's all voluntary. So
yeah. Well, like I've talked to a lot of these alt-right folks, and they like some of them seem to have this conception that they're going to turn the entire United States into a white country, and somehow they're going to get all the the blacks and Asians and whatever else out of here, right? And it's going to be a lot of them are socialists, right? So a lot of them, they want big government. They want to small in some ways, but bigger as far as social programs, and they feel like these things can only work if it's if the society is homogenous, right? And so that's how they feel, because a lot of people aren't going to want to pay for a certain group that's constantly on welfare or something like that, right? So
national socialists.
What I keep telling them, well, maybe not to that. Some of them are, but there's a lot of different positions in the alt-right, but what I keep telling them.
Sorry, I just very quickly, I agree with the problems they're saying. Like, if you can look to different demographic groups and say that they have higher crime or higher worker usage, I don't think that's good. But I would just say that obviously more freedom is going to sort people out, and more voluntarism is going to sort people out anyway. So you don't need to go your ethnic white nationalist state, even though it might end up that way. In voluntary, but I think a voluntary situation will sort the people of different ethnic groups together toward by ability or achievement or intelligence or whatever. I think that would be more fine. And my argument with that is that yes, people will say, I value an ethno-state because I value similar DNA. Well, that's true in the same way that they value similar DNA and they extend it to an ethnic group. I value my own DNA in that I would like to give my resources to my own children and further my own direct genes. I don't want my resources taken away from my family by the white guy down the street either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, my point of bringing that up was just to say that they're always trying to make, the whole of the like the whole U.S. territory fit into this one size fits all. What I'm saying is the likelihood of that happening is very unlikely. And so I often tell them, look, you would have more of a chance of picking a state in the United States and saying, we're all just going to concentrate here and then secede, right? Or secede or something like what they're trying to do here in the Free State Project, right? Their goal was to get and I think they've reached that, to get 20,000 signers to move to New Hampshire. So they're 20,000 libertarians, voluntarists and such, move here and then affect policies here through voting and act, what do they call it? Activism, and it's a certain kind of activism. But
it's a good idea.
Yeah, and that's what it's still not very likely. I think you're going to need more than 20,000, but it's still more likely than trying to. 300 million is a lot of and humans just don't. Humans are their brain can only, 150 people can only know intimately 150 people at a time. So it's people are just very tribal by nature, and then you have this massive central government that's trying to impose universal values. It's trying to universalize, at least on this this large landmass here, and it doesn't work because
they're trying to impose. Sorry?
I'm sorry.
So which universal values are they trying to impose?
Well, what I mean by that is imposing federal laws, right? Whereas not everyone has the same interests and not all the same rules work for everybody, right? Some states have slightly different rules because of the circumstances in that state. It just works that way for them. So they have, that kind of thing. But then you have the federal government that tries to impose, right, the rules of the Constitution and other federal rules that they just pull out of their ass on everybody else, right? And it doesn't, and so you have this constant war, right? And what I'm saying is that if you could carve it up into different countries and say, over here is Ancapistan, over here you have your socialism, right? Because like Ancapistan is not going to work out, I would argue, for someone who's disabled and can't fend for themselves and has no family, for example, right? It might be more feasible for them to go over to Bernie Sanders territory and get their Gives Me That programs, right? And get their check, right? And if you have that ability where people can coalesce naturally in the type of system that works for them, that would be better for everyone in the subjective sense. In other words, everyone's subjective ideals would, or more people's subjective ideals would be gratified if you had, instead of a one size fits all, we're just gonna, enforce this one set of rules on everybody. That doesn't seem to work very well.
I mean, maybe you would think that everyone, at least as a universal value, could say, I value living in a society or state or whatever that reflects my values.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm obviously there are, like, don't torture babies for your own personal pleasure, like I mentioned before, is something that, but I'm saying there are certain edicts that don't transfer very well to every circumstance and state, if you will. So,
sure.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is, like, you have this one hierarchy that's trying to rule 350 million people, and there's not all those people have the same interests, same goals. See what I'm saying? And so you're forced to initiate violence on all of these people in order to get them to do. And I'm saying, if that's not what you want, then you ought to split up and have these different flavors of states or whatever that are not ruled by one overarching authority. Right? That's all that I'm saying, right? Like, you may not be able to get the whole world on board with the non-aggression principle, but it would be more likely for you to find some place, take it over, maybe not by force, but through voting or whatever the freak political means. You know what I mean?
I don't think the whole world is going to universally go ANCAP. But I think that the most likely thing is to say, if you have a value that you want to uphold self-ownership, and if you want to be able to claim the right to own private property, and if you want to hold voluntary interaction as a value, all these things,
right?
Then I'll weed out those people and see what we do with that information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, cool, man. I think we're about an hour 50, so I might.
I got you. It's been a long conversation.
Really great chat. Thanks a lot. I might check out your book. Do you want to post this on the channel? So let everyone know where they can get your book, and I'll grab a copy too, I think.
Well, if you just go, I'm not really trying to make money or anything. I mean, you can purchase it if you want, but you can also read it for free if you go to www.power minus the minus symbol nihilism.education, and you should see on the side there on the site there'll be a little thing where a little window that you can click on, and you can read it or you can purchase it or both. And I'm not, again, it's a book that I'm not trying to make money off of. If I get a few bucks here and there, that's great, but it's more or less for educational purposes. So it's, accessible. That's why I have it self-published in that way, so that, if I did it through like a main publishing place, they would want money for it no matter what, and you wouldn't be able to read it for free, right? So you can also contact me at power-nihilism@gmail.com, and I can email you a copy of that, and I'll email you a copy of it. You just contact me there, and I'll send you a free copy, and you can just go go to town on it. But the purchasing is for the hardcover edition, so because it costs money to print, so that's the only reason why it costs money, really.
And just as an interesting little wrap up, what value are you acting from in writing and putting this book out there?
Well, in the introduction, I specifically say for the people that I'm writing to, and I write to the fellow I-Theists, the people that share my values.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the people. I know I have a very specific audience. My book is definitely not for everyone, and certainly many people with certain moral sensibilities will find it, maybe offensive, depending on whether they're Victorian or not, or whether you're SJW. Because I spend a lot of time in the book arguing against leftist values, leftist ideology, and what I call slave and herd morality. And so I spend a good amount in that, basically pissing off those people. So if you're of that persuasion, you may just want to stay away from the book. But unless you're like of that persuasion, but you have a strong stomach and you can listen to opposing views without getting extremely triggered, then yeah, fine. But I'm basically writing to people like myself, right? And maybe people that are not as far along intellectually as I am, and so that's why I'm writing in such a way. Like the first part of the book is the introduction is a defining terms. I spend the first part of the book defining terms so that we're all on board and we all know what I'm talking about, right? And then there's a foreword that was written by somebody who had been watching my videos. For a long time, and they deconverted from Christianity and became a moral nihilist, basically, and through watching my videos. And because my background is in theology, I was an open air preacher. I was affiliated with Ray Comfort. He's down in your neck of the woods there. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, banana.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah. So like I preached for that guy, and I went through his thing, and I went through my deconversion at the time that I was around the time that I was preaching with him, and then I got into more serious philosophical things like presuppositional apologetics, and I got into the Greek, the original language of the New Testament. And then I had a deconversion, and that's actually was my gateway into philosophy. I was already a Christian apologist, arguing presuppositional apologetics, and which exposed me to a lot of Calvinist philosophy. But then as I deconverted, I found other philosophies like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and A.J. Ayer and C.L. Stevenson and many others, and caused me to look at a lot of other people's positions. And part of the reason why I know a lot of positions so well is that I don't know if you know this, but Christian apologists, when we're off by each other, we practice other people's positions, so that when we're talking to a Muslim, or we're talking to an atheist, or we're talking to a humanist, or whatever the case might be, we know their position backwards and forwards, and so we know how to argue against it, right? And so I got really, really good at that, and that's really helped me in, that's part of the reasons why I think I like to have these kinds of conversations, is because I like to really genuinely understand someone's position, not so just so I can argue against it. I may actually find some agreement, but just so I know what I'm dealing with. Because one thing I experienced, and I'll cut this short because I know we got to go, but one thing I've experienced is that a lot of people don't even take the time to do that, and so they end up straw manning, and they don't actually care about what the actual position is, because they just want to win an argument, right?
Yeah.
And so because I value truth, that's kind of where I'm at. I like to have these kind of conversations, and even if I disagree with somebody, I can still understand their position and address it honestly.
Yeah, great. And according to my value, that is what we should do to resolve disputes. And it is endlessly frustrating talking to leftists. And they can't recite what your position is at all.
I've learned that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say this real quick. like on the discussion of leftists and valuing truth, I just want to say that a lot of leftists, especially nowadays, it's not even worth having this kind of discussion with them. You're better off trolling them because they don't care about truth. And once you get to argue with them, and even after you show them their positions are false so that they have no basis, they don't care. And they'll just resort to ridicule and calling you racist or sexist or homophobe or whatever, catch term. And for them, and I cover this in the book, that it's really not about truth. It's about power, right? And the only reason why I value truth is because it's in my power interest to do so.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. You just, best thing to do, most of them, is say, well, I identify as a crippled elderly black woman, so, and walk away.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm what do they call that, transracial. Transracial, yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I think it was Pythagoras, I'm trying to remember his name, something Pythagoras that came up with that whole thing. I can't remember his name, something Pythagoras. He's a YouTube guy, and he has kind of your perspective. He's more on the anarchist side, and he argues, he basically trolls lefties like that. He says that he identifies as a lesbian black woman or something like that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant. Look, man, I'll check out your book, and I'll drop you a message if we can have another interesting chat, because it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great.
Getting in touch. Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of areas of agreement with you, so...
Yeah, if you wanted to understand what I was saying earlier about non-cognitivism, for example, I did a series on my YouTube channel. So it's the you do the YouTube URL and then you do the / username. Even though my channel's called I-Theist, the on the URL, the / and then the end is open air atheist. But if you go to that, you can watch a series. I think it's called Emotivism, and that'll explain in detail what I was talking about as far as non-cognitivism. And then that's also covered in the beginning intro section of my book. So either way, if you like videos or
why don't you drop us a message, links to those, and I'll post them in the loader.
All right, yeah, I'll shoot you a link to my channel and my website, and then you do that.
Cool.
All right.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks for getting in touch. I'll end the chat now and speak to you soon. It's been great.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, mate.